the state of California.
Wow.
And every 6% of the people that we don't count in California is $1 billion in funding that we're losing for programs like this. So what's really important about the census and why it's essential is because this is the funding that goes towards programs like Medi-Cal, CalFresh, school lunch programs, women's, infants, and children's, the resource centers across the areas. All these low income and sort of like funding for these programs comes from the census. Additionally, the information from the census, more specifically the date of birth, is what's really important because this is what allows the state of California to understand what's needed in the community. So, for example, if we're looking at an area with a high concentration of seniors, based on the results of the census, the state would allocate some of that funding towards the building of resources and facilities for seniors. Likewise, children would get more learning facilities. We could get more housing for areas that show high populations of people living in small amount of housing areas, reconstruction for like recreational facilities, parks, programs, streets, things like that. All that information on what we need to spend our money on for the state comes from the census polls. And all that funding, it's all free. All we have to do is list who's living where, and then we get this money. And that's the reason why, mashallah, we were able to increase the limits on the Medi-Cal for people who can apply or not, the income gap and the federal poverty income level. All those amounts and limits for the Medi-Cal programs and things like that, federal subsidy and things like that, they're increased, and they can accept more people the more people we get enlisted in the census.
Thank you so much. So I think that your overview just gave a really quick, in-depth sense of exactly how important this information is. And I think another thing to highlight is that, people have to take the census themselves. It's not something where, the government can go to every single residence and actually make sure that it is counting every person in the country, even though that is technically the constitutional mandate. The reason that we as advocates and community partners, we need to be informing the community about this in the first place is because unless folks count themselves in by taking their census questionnaire, they will not necessarily. So we're going to get into that a little bit more, but I just want to again introduce myself and Osama as CAIR San Francisco Bay Area. So my name again is Eliza Cosme, and I'm the advocacy manager at CAIR San Francisco Bay Area. And also on this call is Brother Osama Kamal, who is our outreach coordinator. And we're based in Santa Clara, but we actually serve the entire Bay Area region. So 9 to 11 counties, depending on how you're looking at the map. And our primary concern is civil rights and upholding and defending civil rights. And the core of our work is legal aid. But we also do an array of programming to build leadership among the community, invest in our youth, and enhance civic engagement among Muslims. And so on the surface level, that's where our concern with the census comes in, is that, this is an opportunity for people to engage civically and participate in our democracy and our society, and it's something that's accessible to everyone. But we also understand that, for civil rights to actually be protected, we also need to be concerned about political enfranchisement, economic enfranchisement. And so that's also where the census is really crucial for us. So moving forward, some of the goals for this conversation are that folks learn more about what our respective roles are in ensuring that the community gets access to quality services and programs that we're able to access by participating in the census, and develop a shared understanding about this opportunity of the census, right? That this happens only once every 10 years. It counts everyone in the community, regardless of immigration status. And like Brother Perweiz was saying, there's a significant amount of federal funding to be gained or lost. depending on how people respond or don't respond. And so this is a crucial opportunity for our community and different communities, our friends, neighbors, our social service providers, to ensure that we have the resources we need to thrive as a community. If at any point people are struggling to hear me, or if there's any technical difficulties, please go ahead and just interrupt me and say that. And same goes for questions. Feel free to just sort of interject, and this can definitely be interactive given that we kind of have a small group. And
I have a question.
Yep.
Can I ask you now? Yes, this is Sheikh Naeem from Evergreen, San Jose, California. The question is, I was just filling this morning, actually. I haven't sent it out yet. I almost done. One question is, one of my daughter, she works in Southern California, and how do I list her? As a San Jose resident or Southern California resident? She most of the time she's there, and she comes here every 2 weeks, something like that.
I see. So the way that people are counted is per the place that they sleep the most often. So for folks who are traveling back and forth to different places, it would be their place of residence where they spend the majority of the year sleeping. So literally the threshold is 6 months out of the year, whether that is in chunks of time, like maybe a month here, maybe a month there. But for at least 6 months out of the year, where is the person spending the night? So does that help?
And what happens if they change job and come back? You don't get a chance to re-census them, right?
If they change their residence?
If they change the job and they're back in San Jose from Southern California.
Mm-hmm. Right. So technically, no, because the census is counting every person only once.
Yeah.
So while you can submit multiple responses, technically, like the system might allow you to do that, they're going to clean the data to make sure that every residence's information is only presented one time. So basically, if you have a couple of options. You can go ahead and submit your census questionnaire now, or technically the window to respond is until the end of July. So if you are, kind of considering this and you would be interested in potentially reevaluating in a month or two, you technically can do that because the window to respond actually goes through July.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for joining us. Anyone else that joined who wants to quickly introduce themselves?
I am sending all this, forwarding the information about census to the community, but I was wondering how the response is. I don't see, this is getting shadowed by the coronavirus.
Right, so we can go ahead and start to get into this presentation and sort of troubleshoot our current situation, which I definitely, can understand. I think all organizations are sort of challenged by the current state of the virus and, how that's impacting this. So just so that everybody knows, this presentation is being recorded. And again, this is sort of how we're going to talk about the census. And I think, this question of how does the virus and needing to respond to that factor in is going to be one that we can sort of address kind of as we go through. So we'll continue to kind of review what the census is and why we have it in the first place, then get into the technical aspect of sort of how it works, which we just already touched on with the question that came up, and then focus on the concern around confidentiality of data and other questions that we've heard from the community. And then start to talk about what are the resources for Masajid and other community leaders, and how can they play a role in supporting census outreach. And I definitely hope that we can come up with some creative solutions, because we're all sort of changing our game plan as we go over the past few days, and looking forward to that. And then inshallah we'll be able to close for Salah. So again, conducting the Bureau, which is a part of the Department of Commerce. And what the census count is again, it only happens every 10 years. And it's counting every person in the country where they live and sleep most of the time. So, for example, another question that has come up is, what about people who come visit on visitor visas, but they're here for over like 6 months of the year? Those people should be counted. So that's like where a lot of the questions tend to come up around who exactly counts. And pretty much everybody does count as long as they reside in most of the year. So again, the threshold that I use is at least 6 months out of the year. And again, the timeline for people responding to the online questionnaire is technically through the end of July of this year. We are similar to voter engagement, which people might engage in or see. We're encouraging early response because we just want to make sure that people actually fill out their questionnaire. We don't want it to get lost in the haze of just, day-to-day life. People have other responsibilities. This is something that the government's asking us to do, but ultimately it's on us to make sure that we actually complete the questionnaire. And so that's sort of the thing about the timeline is, though it's technically through the end of July, we are continuing with having this convening today, for example, even though we're having to do it virtually, because this is something that is really urgent to us, because we want to make sure that people do go ahead and respond. And then the website for the self-response is pretty easy to remember. It's my2020census.gov. So you can go ahead and you've already pulled that up for your residents. If you're the person filling out the questionnaire in your residence, you could go ahead and pull that up, bookmark it. Otherwise, we will be sharing this presentation and these slides following the convening, inshallah. All right, so this is where I wanted to come back to this question about the virus and how this intersects. So really what the census is about is making sure that people are not left behind, that they're counted in to the government's decision making around how to allocate resources. So like Brother Perwez again was touching on earlier, the first thing that I don't actually have on this slide is data, right? So we use the data of demographics to determine how we understand how the government makes sense of different communities, to understand then in turn how to allocate federal funds that go towards programs such as childcare, Head Start, WIC, which is Women and Children's Assistance, and all sorts of other really pressing needs in our community, as we all know. Things like transportation infrastructure, affordable housing. We're in dire need as a community, even though not necessarily every individual is impacted. It does impact the entire community when you have insufficient or poorly managed resources to go towards these public goods. And then the other piece is that the redistricting that happens to determine political representation in Congress, that is also conducted using the census data. So there's a whole, array of things that the data inform. I think, also another example that I just, was reading about, which I thought was particularly helpful, is, for example, when trying to research, civil rights violations, such as, police brutality and other social issues that are coming up. And sometimes you see the headlines and they mention communities of color, or that this community that is being impacted by this problem is primarily primarily Black and brown. It's primarily low income. That kind of information is definitely informed by census data, because one of the key things that the census asks about is race and ethnicity. It asks people to identify themselves racially. So any questions about this kind of aspect of why we have the census count? Oh, and sorry, I was going to say also with regards to the virus. So as we're seeing, there's different inequities that are coming up around, who is able to access tests, who's able to get the healthcare assistance that they need. And we're seeing that the people who are the most vulnerable because they're renters and or they make lower wages, they're lower income. They don't have the same level of economic and political power as other folks who are able to just request a test and they just get tested, versus other people who are having to make different phone calls, go to different places, and then even after this whole roundabout, they're not being tested. That's not a coincidence, right? It's because of how the government allocates its attention and resources. And so the census is really an opportunity for us to enfranchise ourselves both economically and politically. And I think, with the situation right now, it's completely understandable that a lot of people's concern is, how am I going to make sure that my children are safe, and healthy? How am I going to make sure that we have enough food and supplies to last us this week and then indefinitely? So that is, of course, we want to make sure that people are feeling supported in this process that can be really scary and uncertain. And the census is, something that it's sort of intangible for a lot of people because, again, it's something that only happens once a decade. It's something that the federal government is carrying out. But every person who responds is taking one step towards making sure that in the future, these resources that we all depend on, that they're, inshallah, allocated more fairly and adequately. And including for different, crises, not just like pandemics, but even when you think about firefighting and different crisis responses, emergency responses. Some of that is, again, federally funded, and so people might not make that connection because they don't necessarily know the ins and outs of where our tax dollars go and which part of the government, which level of the government is funding what. But certainly crisis and emergency response is a part of this. So also just reviewing how the census works. I know this letter might look familiar to some of us. So there was a letter that was begun to be sent out this month that every resident should have received, which basically explained what the census is and how people should respond. And then it also provides an ID that's a unique ID for the residents that the letter is mailed to. And a key thing to know there is people don't actually need to locate this letter or remember or note that census ID on the letter. It is helpful if they do, because if they do use their census ID when they're filling out the census, it just kind of streamlines the process of their questionnaire being counted. But even if, let's say, I get this letter and I lose it, or I just don't feel really comfortable maybe about using an ID that is tied to my specific residence, ultimately I can still fill out the questionnaire and counted.
Excuse me. I have one question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. In my portion, for example, we have members in our mosque from different city. For example, our member is living even in Concord, in Tracy, in Pleasanton, but most of them in San Jose. It is easy for me to distribute the form, and they should complete it. And if I collected the form, it's a different city where we should give that form to some organization or online, or there is some office?
So, to my knowledge, the forms, you can only access those like they would be mailed to the specific residence. Does somebody know anything different?
No, I can distribute it in the mosque to my member, and we can maybe send it online. They will be fill up the form, but we should collect it in the mosque to give someone, or to send it by email or online to the some responsible office.
Okay, so the best way, the way that we're recommending is by going to the website, and people can log on to this website at the masjid if you're able to offer that. And so the website again, I've up, so you should be able to see it if you're looking at the presentation. It's my2020census.gov,
Yeah.
and again, this is the form that you have to fill out per residence. This is the simplest way to make sure that the questionnaire is submitted.
That is good. Okay.
And then if they don't respond this way, after a few weeks, I believe starting sometime next month or in May, people should be able to receive a paper form. But I'm not certain that every residence would necessarily receive a paper form. It's just if your residence isn't shown to have submitted the online response, then you'll receive a paper form. But
so we can print it to distribute to them?
No, unfortunately, no. And so this is where the outreach around the census becomes somewhat challenging, because one of the main tactics that was planned was that different organizations, including Masajid, including CAIR, and some of our partners, we could use smartphones or tablets and actually go door to door, or host different events, like for example at the masjid, where we could just quickly have people fill out their questionnaire right there and then, in case they had any questions or needed any kind of assistance. But the best thing to do is for everybody in the masjid to be aware, the whole congregation to be aware of that link of my2020census.gov. And then what I personally would recommend is, like, let's say you're having an in-person or virtual event like Jummah, asking people to take a second to take out their smartphone or look on their computer if this is like a virtual event, because I think some events are also becoming virtual at the masjid, to pull up this website and to go ahead and start filling it out or fill it out right then and there.
Do you have the different language, for example? Then, because most of our elderly, they are not using the online system. So most of them is not understand English. So do you have some kind of program to translate it with the translation, the form to submit with them, and they fill up the whole information? Because in our Bay Area is about 9 to 10 Afghan mosques here. So the population is about 70 to 80,000 people. They are all around this mosque. So that is why this is another problem, because they don't know how to fill up the English form. So do you have any kind of for Farsi language form, or there is any possibility or something?
So I'm looking to see, there should be language video guides in the different languages. And I'm sorry, I should have pulled this up earlier, but you can either take the census in English or Arabic or a number of other languages, which are shown here on the homepage. And then I'm going to try to do a search to see if one of the language video guides might be in Farsi or Afghan or Pashto, excuse me. But Another thing is the Afghan Coalition.
Yes.
I don't know if you are connected to them. They're planning to provide.
Yeah.
Okay. So they were planning to provide language assistance, but I'm not sure, exactly how that'll be impacted by the social distancing precautions because of the virus. So one thing I could do looks like language. I'm sure that one of them should be Farsi. Unfortunately, this is not super easy to navigate, but we can look at it because that language guide would be definitely a resource that I think you could help disseminate so that multiple people who need that language assistance because they can't fill it out in English so that they have the support that they need.
Okay, thank you.
I can answer. This is Bassem. So there is a Farsi guide that goes step by step how to fill it out. It's very detailed, and I can share that link with you.
Okay, thank you, Bassem. I don't know if there's like a link where you can just find all the language guides.
Yeah, I'm sending it to you right now. There's one link. It has so many languages. It's from the official census.gov. Probably like, say maybe 60 languages. Yep.
Right.
Yeah, Aliza, it's probably that first link that says language support, where it says English and 59 other languages.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Perfect.
There's this print one, and then I think that these should also be in video, right? All of them. So somewhere should be. I just wanted to confirm that they did have Farsi. It sounds like they do. Yep, there we go.
Yeah, they have.
Yeah. So.
So what is the website?
Yep.
It's census.gov.
Census.gov.
And then if you click on the 2020 Census Research Operational Plans and Oversight,
yeah,
it's actually you know what it's probably easier to see if you just Google Census Farsi. It's gonna be you're gonna see it says Farsi Census Bureau. Or sorry, no, language. You're gonna see maybe the fourth item will be language guides, prints, Census Bureau.
Oh,
that's
I understand.
Yeah, so we'll make sure that we send these links, and it looks like you have two options for the language guide. You can do print, sort of like text description, and then there's also video. So those are a couple of resources. Other I to point out, there is a phone line as well that people are able to fill out, which are able to call, which people would be able to get phone assistance.
Okay.
And that could be useful. I understand some people, just need the immediate in-language support. So in that case, the language guide might be useful. So as we've been discussing, you can fill out the census online, which is encouraged by phone or by mail if you wait to receive a paper questionnaire. But again, we're encouraging that people go ahead and work to fill it out online. And the different, forms of assistance that they have are the census itself, and our organizations are happy to support. So this is really helpful that we're having this conversation today because it's helping us understand exactly where we need to focus, but definitely language assistance is a priority. And again, while we're all explaining the census to people, it's important to emphasize that there is no question about people's citizenship status. So some people are, just unaware that because of their immigration status, they are actually able to take the census. Like they think that, well, I'm not a citizen or I'm not able to vote. So why would I, fill out this questionnaire? And so that's one part of it, is explaining to them that this is something that's counting everyone. And the other aspect is fear or uncertainty. Like, if I provide this information about different people living in my residence, and there's somehow the government is tracking like different people's immigration status, then is that going to flag us for public charge or people who are undocumented or things like that? And the answer is no. And realistically, whatever data there might be on different people of undocumented status, that might already be with the government. And so it's definitely valid for people to be concerned about giving their personal information to the government, just given all of our different experiences as a community with the data being used against us. But we'll talk about the specific protections around the census specifically, to where it is actually a crime for anyone's data to be breached and to not be held confidential. And so we'll get into that later. Yes.
Okay. Only the last question I have. For example, if we hire someone to go door to door and they completed the form by our members, we have almost 250 to 300 family members. So if we hire someone from our mosque to go to some elder, which is they cannot able to fill up the form, there is any pay to those people? There is any kind of budget?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
So, for example, if we hire someone from our mosque to go door to door and they fill up the application by the people who does not understand the English or something, and they should go into place to place. So there is any budget for those people to spend about?
Okay, Bassem,
Yes.
No, can you repeat that?
So for example,
so he's asking, is there a budget for them to hire people to go door to door and do? Yes.
So which center is that? Which organization?
South Bay Afghan Community Center in San Jose.
Yeah. So right now we're switching everything from the canvassing to phone banking. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be supporting phone banking, but I'll tell you right now, there's talk of the governor calling for a complete lockdown in the next 48 hours.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, everything's just shutting down. So I don't see door to door. Door to door could be a last resort, depending what happens with the government. What the executive order is exactly. We could possibly do door hangers as a last resort, just leaving door hangers with information. But focus. We've hired data consultants to set up a very in-depth phone banking system. It should be up and running early in the week, so we can support there. But I think that's going to be the priority, and we're going to take it also digital, where we're going to do a lot of online marketing to the different communities that we're supposed to.
Thank you, I got it.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. So I should also introduce Bassem. Bassem Al-Qura is actually the executive director of the Sacramento chapter of CAIR. So as I was saying earlier, myself and Osama are on behalf of CAIR San Francisco Bay Area, and then CAIR Sacramento, CAIR San Francisco Bay Area, and our other California chapters are actually all working together as part of CAIR California, as the administrative community-based organization to reach Middle East North Africans around the census. And so Bassem is overseeing and managing that effort, and he's the one that's the most kind of in touch with the state of California to understand what are our parameters. And as he's saying, we're all sort of shifting our strategy to make sure that we are taking precautions as advised around the virus. So, but we certainly appreciate any masajid that are interested in supporting the phone banking or digital media advocacy around census, and so that's something that we definitely want to talk about on this call. Just a couple other notes before we continue around the technical aspects of the census. So you also, again, want to make sure that you're including newborn babies as long as they are born within this time frame of April 1st, 2020 onwards. They do count. And then again, even if people in the residence are not citizens, if they live in the residence most of the time, they need to be counted. And we'll talk more about the confidentiality aspect, but another thing is that the data can't even be shared with landlords, and so sometimes people have a concern that they have a lot of different people living in the residence, and maybe they're over the capacity that was laid out in their rental agreement for renting that property. And so they're concerned that if they, go ahead and list that out on their census questionnaire, that might make its way back to their landlord, and again, it cannot. So that's another thing that comes up when we're explaining that you want to make sure that you're counting every person in your residence. So again, only one submission per residence. The data will be cleaned to make sure that every residence is represented once and only once, and every person is counted once and only once in their place of normal, like typically where they sleep. And then we also listed out the two assistance numbers for Arabic and English, and then I'll go ahead and also input the links for the text and video language guides. The questionnaire assistance centers. So first of all, I'm sorry, we overlooked this link is particular to Marin County, but basically every county, again, was also working to provide in-person questionnaire assistance. But that is changing now because of the virus. And so I think the best thing is for everybody to look up their specific county where your masjid is located and check in with the county. They will most likely have a specific census website. So for example, for Marin, it's marincensus2020.org. And I found it just by Googling Marin County Census. And they should have updates potentially posted there, or you can call and try to understand what the different counties' updates are. But I didn't try to look that up because the situation is developing, hour by hour, day by day, and so what a county tells you one day, it might actually continue to shift as we continue. So, for example, with Santa Clara County, I know that as of Friday, they were still kind of figuring out what their current plan will be for census outreach, because they had been planning to do, the in-person outreach that we've been discussing, and now they need to recalibrate. And so they didn't have a final answer on Friday afternoon on this call that I was on. So the other thing is that at some point later in the spring, residences that don't fill out the census online will actually be potentially visited by a census worker. So I just wanted to show everybody some of the ways that you could identify this person if and when it gets to this point. So this is another situation where, first of all, not every single residence that doesn't respond to the questionnaire will receive a visit, because that's not possible. It is just not possible for the government to send a census worker to every residence that doesn't fill out its questionnaire. But if this is going to be happening, again, it's a big if, because it really depends on how the situation with the virus progresses. But there's specific things that you can identify a census worker through. So there's the U.S. Census 2020 logo. They should have, different kinds of apparel here, like this bag, lanyard that she's got on, that would identify that this is a legitimate census worker. And the most important thing is that they will have these federal IDs. And so there's specific elements of the ID, like the watermark of the Department of Commerce and the expiration date, that people should be able to present if they're an actual census worker. So just wanted to highlight that, assuming that we do get to that point of census enumeration where the government, they've been working to try to hire folks to do the enumeration. You might have even been contacted by the census to try to help really needed support with people with different languages. But yeah, so it's sort of complex because they didn't necessarily hire or recruit the amount of people that they needed to, and then also we don't know what's going to happen as far as the virus affecting how they do that enumeration. All right, so as far as census data confidentiality, again, the data will only stay within the Census Bureau, and it's going to be aggregated into general statistics about neighborhoods, cities, counties, not individual people. And that's the data that is able to be used by other agencies and entities. So no landlord or no department such as the FBI, Immigration and Customs, Homeland Security, none of those agencies can access any individual's information, and that's under penalty of a fine and or jail time if a census worker were to breach anyone's confidentiality. They could pay up to, I think it's $250,000 fine and up to 5 years in prison. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but it's pretty serious, to the point that even organizations like CAIR that are doing outreach, when we're talking to community members and when we're assisting them with their census questionnaire, we really have to be very clear that we are not federal employees, that we're not technically, bound to the same, stipulations around keeping people's information confidential. And so the things that people can look out for, again, to make sure that their whole process of filling out their census questionnaire is secure, is to make sure that they're using the correct links. And so again, we can provide all those helpful links of not just the my2020census.gov, but also the language guides, so that people are ensuring that they're clicking on a legitimate link, not some kind of scam. People should also understand just general tips on making sure that they are providing only the information necessary to the right entity. So no one from the census would ever ask anybody for their social security number, about their financial situation, asking for financial information. That is not a part of the questionnaire, right? And so you want to also familiarize yourself with what is the questionnaire itself actually asking, which we could do a little demo because I have it pulled up so we can look through the questionnaire later if that's helpful. It sounds like some people have already started looking at it. So at this point, I also want to pause and just say, are there questions that people may have been noting that they are hearing from the community? Because I have some listed here that we've heard, but definitely, interested to know, are there that you might already have been hearing in your masjid around the census, if any?
So this is Muhi from American Muslim Community Foundation, and one of the things that we have been asked through this process is how long do people have to fill out the census? So again, I'm pretty sure that it runs through August, but as a strategy for the entire Muslim community in the United States, we're really hoping that our community can fill out the census on Friday, April 3rd. And you'll start seeing a lot more online and through different media sources about this tagline that we're calling Muslims Count 2020. So that's one of the things in which we encourage you to share with your congregation as you start implementing some of this work around the census.
Thanks, Muhi. Yeah, I think, again, as we were saying kind of in the beginning of the call, in addition to phone banking, which might be more something that different advocacy orgs like AMCF and CAIR could, something that a lot of masajids do that is already very useful to us, and we really appreciate your partnership and support, is just using your digital platform. So whether you have an email newsletter, whether you're active on social media, we have blurbs that you can literally just copy and paste, or we'll have this April 3rd day, of really pushing the Muslim community to participate. And so those are really easy, low stakes things that you can lean on us for to integrate into your digital communications that reach, a wide audience and are just really effective, we think, especially when they're coming from someone's masjid, directly versus just from like other organizations. So that's a really big piece because you are really respected, you're trusted, and your voice in promoting the census is really critical. So again, there is this question of how is the census relevant to Muslims in particular, and what we have found helpful is just emphasizing that this is something that translates into life-saving resources. For example, crisis and emergency assistance, as well as just different really vital resources for our community, for our children, and every Muslim is impacted by that, even those who are more socioeconomically, well off and maybe don't understand the, impact to them specifically. As Muslims, it's literally a part of our faith practice, right, to be concerned for the public good and social welfare. And so this is something that it literally just takes a few minutes for us all to participate. And when we do, we're elevating our needs as a community. And we're saying that, we are counting ourselves in because we want those resources. We need those resources to make sure that everybody who needs housing is housed. Everybody who, has a long commute has adequate transportation infrastructure to make it safely to and from work, or people who don't drive, that, they have the resources to get from point A to point B. I mean, these are really day-to-day needs that, again, it's not as tangible as, maybe other sort of like other things like voting even is not even as tangible, as sort of like talking to maybe even service providers. But whatever we can do, to make the census and its impact tangible to the community, spelling it out, that is really the way to show and demonstrate the relevance. And so, for example, for any of us to say that, hey, we have $1,000 per person per year to either gain or lose in federal funding for different, resources, that's a particular way to frame this that does resonate with people because they see that there's an actual estimated dollar amount. It actually could be more, depending on where people live. But the $1,000 per person per year, that's something that we definitely encourage people promoting. And also, I mentioned voting. The census is something that everybody can participate in. So even though, with voting, elected officials impact the entire community, including people who can't vote. Those people who can't vote don't have a voice in choosing those representatives, those decision makers. Versus with the census, it impacts three things at least. It impacts research, it impacts, the federal funding piece, and it also does lead to that decision on how many, congressional representatives per area, because if there's accurate data about, different areas, then that will translate to accurate and fair representation. So congressional representation is, definitely relevant to our community. Again, it might seem a little distant, but we know as Muslims that different decisions that Congress make, or different ways that they check the president, for example, that does definitely impact our community. So that's what I'll say around the relevance to our community, but we have, again, different talking points that people will be able to use, so that you can sort of tweak this according to what you know will resonate most in your community, because we know that our community is not a monolith and we can't necessarily have the same, one-size-fits-all talking point for every city or every neighborhood necessarily. With the citizenship question, again, clarifying that there is no citizenship question, that the citizenship question was an attempt that essentially it came out of the president's office, and it was specifically designed to disenfranchise Latino Americans, because they knew that if they asked about people's citizenship status, that would deter participation. But the Supreme Court actually overruled that, and so there is no citizenship question. So that's a win for our community, because even if you look at the fastest growing ethnic group of Muslims in the country, it's Latinos. So this is all connected, and understanding that if it were irrelevant, if the census didn't matter, then they wouldn't have tried to input that question and make sure that every person would have to answer what their citizenship status is. But the Supreme Court made the right decision on this issue, in saying that no, we can't include that question because it would deter participation on something that is already hard to get people to participate, and it's literally the law. It's by the Constitution that we must count every person in the country. So we're not going to derail that with the inclusion of that question. So that's a little extra background, that could support and encourage people in understanding the relevance of the census to them. The other frequently asked question is around the race categories. So when you look at the questionnaire, for every person in the residence, they're asking about certain things. They're asking the person's name, they're asking their age, their sex, and they're also asking about race. Now, there is no category for Middle East North African on this census. There's been a lot of advocacy to include that category. Unfortunately, it's not on this census, but inshallah, it could be on the next one. And one way to make sure that happens, and one way to make sure that, again, we are all counted accurately, is there is an other box that people can check to fill in their race or ethnicity if they don't feel that it's represented in the different options of boxes that you could check. So if you're looking at that question and you don't see something that reflects Afghan or Syrian or different ethnicities that are not actually represented in those choices, you can still write it in. You can still be very specific, and you might have seen different groups of essentially just different Black and brown folk, Indigenous people, really promoting that their communities be super specific about exactly which tribe or exactly which race, ethnicity they are, to make sure that they are forcing the census to take note of that. And then in 2030, that's the idea that category would actually be added. And there are new categories on the census that were not previously on the census. So they do look at that. They do evaluate in between every census, how do we need to make sure that we are getting everybody counted fairly. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and this along. The only other thing I'm going to say with regards to this last question here about how are people counted who are unhoused or incarcerated right now, there's a separate system specific for those communities called Group Quarter. This also applies to college students, although we are continuing to understand, as college students are not necessarily living on campus right now because a lot of colleges and universities are switching to online classes only, how that might change. But definitely for unhoused and incarcerated people, there's a specific process that the census engages in where they go and work to count those people where they are at. For unhoused people, they will go to the different sort of like areas where there tends to be, a higher density of people living outside, like for example, underpasses and places like that. But they'll also be working with service providers who are able to assist in understanding the demographics and the count of people who may be accessing shelter or other services. So that's something that, again, this is not the only survey that the government carries out. There's different processes where unhoused people are counted, and so that's factored into how the census is conducted as well. So again, coming back to the importance of the census for our community, if you frame it in terms of how much is at stake, like what we have to lose, every person who is not counted, we could lose up to around $10,000 per decade because that person was not counted. And that person might be, again, a newborn baby. They might be someone who is not a citizen, and maybe they thought that, the census didn't apply to them, which we continue to hear people say is like, I don't have to fill that out, or I shouldn't fill that out because I'm not a citizen. And then also just, when we think about for our different neighborhoods and cities and counties, what are these really pressing social issues are impacting the community, that at some point federal funding or lack thereof and federal representation of elected officials in Congress, at some point those things factor in determining, are we getting the resources that we need, or are we continuing to be sidelined and marginalized as a community? And in particular for California is one of the hardest to count states. And within the Bay Area in particular, like Alameda County. And some of the reasons are because people of color, immigrants, people with limited English, these kinds of people are continuously undercounted, as in they are just not counted census after census. So this is a generational challenge with every single census that people who, have those types of barriers, which, their social barriers, their economic barriers in general, they factor in with the census, right? And people are undercounted. So we already know, like Brother Perliz was saying in the beginning, that Muslims are being undercounted because even though we don't have a Muslim box on the census and we don't know exactly how many Muslims are being undercounted, we know that a lot of Muslims are people of color. We know that a lot of Muslims are immigrants. They recently arrived. They might not have been here in 2010 when the last census happened, or even if they were, a lot of people literally just don't even know that the census is happening because there's limited outreach. And so there's been this, intense effort by the government, by foundations, by different entities to really make sure that, especially because this census, the thing that's different about it is this is the first time that we actually have the online response option. In the past, people could only respond by mail. And so now you have 3 response options. You have mail, phone, and online. And there's concerns also because a lot of people, because of the language barrier or because, they're just not as literate digitally, they're older maybe and they aren't as comfortable with the computer, that could even exacerbate the undercounting. So that's why it's really crucial for all of us to support each other as much as possible, even through, these different challenges of all the other issues that, you have to support your community with, especially the virus. We completely understand it's a real challenge right now. But I think the key is, highlighting the opportunity, highlighting what's at stake, and working together. Working together to see what are some easy, effective ways to make sure that we are informing people about what the census is, why it's important, and how to participate. So, again, just to kind of recap, the census is accessible, and it is something that literally everybody can participate in, regardless of what your housing status is, what your language ability with English is. You should be able to get the support that you need to participate. So that's a distinction from the voting system or other forms of civic engagement. It's also pretty straightforward. There's a number of questions, and basically they're just basic demographic questions about the different people living in the residence, nothing around citizenship. And the impact of one residence or one individual filling out that information is literally multiplied over 10 years and beyond and across the community. The data is specifically anonymous because it's aggregated, so the statistics are generalized, and there's no data released that is specific to any one residence, and it's held confidential. And then, another thing, if you're talking about the significance of voting and voting rights, because we did already have our primary election, but of course we have this historic general election coming up in November of this year. The census does directly connect to that as well, because, again, with the data around what languages people speak, and other demographic information about different areas, the government is able to understand how it is adequately enforcing voting rights. So, as we all know, we've been discussing in this call, language access is a particularly strong issue for California and for people in our state. And in order for the government to have a sense of, what languages to make sure that are accessible in the voting process, they need to know the accurate demographic data. And so literally the census helps enforce voting rights in that regard, because a part of the Voting Rights Act is to ensure that people with different language needs are all able to vote if they have that ability to vote. And then, also just thinking about how to go beyond survival mode as a community, like how do we create opportunities, how do we create jobs, how do we, become effective and really make sure that educational services and different really key, public services are actually accessible. It's with the use of that data, including, like I've said before, crisis response. So that's where the life-saving programs and services come in. And then also, when different businesses or entities, including masajid, are able to access that data, that also supports service provision, or like local businesses reach their clientele and their community more effectively, because they're able to understand more about who lives in their community, which is definitely a big part of many of our missions. So, okay, at this point, I want to invite people to bring up any questions or comments. Thank you for bearing with me through that presentation, and thank you for your questions so far. And when you make your question or comment, if you could just reintroduce your name and organization or masjid, that would be helpful.
I don't have any question. Lots of grateful information.
Wonderful. Since more people have joined, I'll say again, my name is Muhi Khwaja from the American Muslim Community Foundation. And if your mosque is interested in receiving some funding for census outreach specifically, we did have a micro grant that was available in February. And considering how things are changing with the coronavirus outbreak and how we may need to shift resources, we will reopen that commitment through the end of this month. So if you are affiliated with the mosque and would like some more help in having resources to specifically help with outreach and engagement of the Muslim community with census work, American Muslim Community Foundation will allow you to apply for those funds until the end of the month. And I will share our website with the details on our website in the chat feature here for you. And we'll also follow up with that information for people who are not on the call itself. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to grants@amuslimcf.org. And I also shared the website, which was amuslimcf.org/grants.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Usama from CAIR. I just want to reiterate that there might be questions that come up later on. So after the call, I would really encourage folks to reach out to myself or Eliza or any of the CAIR staff for support during that process. And so for the mosques that are on the call, that maybe they reach out to community members and there are questions or concerns or support that they feel like they need our support with, or maybe they don't, but want to check in. I encourage folks to, the more questions that you ask, the better. The more you know, the better, inshallah.
And along those lines as well, please ask your mosques to include it in their email newsletters, and we can provide resources for you so that at least we are spreading the word about the census and Muslim participation on Friday, April 3rd, and we're calling that Muslims Count 2020 if they use a hashtag on social media to do that. And you can find some of those resources on different platforms as well. So again, we hope that you can encourage your mosques through email listservs to engage with the census at this time and participate on Friday, April 3rd, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Basim with CAIR California. Just want to second what Muhi said about the funds, and also I'll coordinate with Muhi because we do have some funds as a reallocating funds from canvassing to phone banking and other types of outreach. We are trying to make more funds available to Masajid, and in support for sending out on the newsletter. We're also asking the imams to maybe do a video or a robocall to all the members of that mosque. And so inshallah, I'll coordinate with Muhi and Eliza to make sure that all the masajid get the support they need to get the word out to their communities, inshallah.
Thank you so much. And I'm just realizing that when I hit present, it's not showing all the slides. So I just also wanted to review some of the other ways that we can continue to support census outreach here on the ground at the local level. So in addition to resources that are available to you all directly to be able to carry out phone banking or other outreach yourselves as the masjid, there people who might not be as familiar, our goal is to engage in the community in person at least once a week. And primarily the way that we do that is with the the moment that is on hold.
Tabling.
Again, we want to make sure that
ing tabling.
Yeah, so
Sorry,
tabling was in the sense of if Jummah was being held at the mosques, we would come to the mosques and do a table explaining the census outreach. But with the coronavirus update, we will probably avoid that, as many mosques have canceled their Jummah Salah.
Thank you.
So, and one thing I do want to offer though is, I'm not the most technologically savvy, but I'm confident that we could work together. For anyone who is doing virtual programming, where you've moved your the programs that are normally in person, such as Jummah, such as family nights, and other events that normally happen in person at the masjid. Some masajid have actually shifted to continuing those programs just online. So kind of like what we're doing right now, we're using Zoom, and I have seen that. So that's a potential way where we could connect virtually and potentially support, making a quick announcement on behalf of our different organizations. Or we also will share those talking points that I mentioned earlier. Whoops, sorry, I just stopped sharing the screen. Let me fix that. But yeah, there's different sets of talking points and language that we're able to support sending out to you all so that you can yourselves make those announcements whenever you're able to. So that's something that or you can do depending on what works. And the other thing is, it's also super helpful when you're able to help us build our volunteer base, because we can work with people remotely, similar to how currently we're actually working remotely as staff. So we can similarly work remotely in collaboration with volunteers to conduct that phone banking, where we can provide people, phone numbers to call, scripts to read off of. But it's always a challenge to retain good volunteers who are excited to do that outreach. So whenever mosque leaders are able to promote that opportunity that people can volunteer with CAIR and they can support, ensuring that our community is counted, people hearing that from you does really encourage them to volunteer, encourage you to that as we've been doing different voter outreach and census outreach, more and more people do want to get involved, but sometimes they just don't know that that's an option for them. And so I wanted to bring that up. And I think if there are no other questions, I also wanted to give Osama an opportunity to talk about some of the other programs that CAIR has coming up with regards to civic engagement and community building that definitely intersect with the census. But just want to make sure, are there any other questions or comments before we do that?
Thank you, Eliza. It's unfortunate that the sort of the pandemic has caused a lot of the programming around the Bay Area to kind of shut down. There were some programs that were scheduled by our office, given the sort of current situation. We're putting a pause on those. One of them being Manzanar 2020. The hope was to take a bunch of community leaders from around the Bay Area and community members to Manzanar, which was a concentration camp where Japanese Americans, more than 120,000 of them were incarcerated. And this is something that CAIR partners up with the Japanese American Citizens League every year on. Unfortunately, that program has been rescheduled. And the hope, inshallah, I think when we're talking about the census, it is about representation, it's about voice, it's about being counted, it's about being conscious of our community, the history of our community, so that we know essentially where we want to go. And I think that in the same sort of what we're doing here is trying to make sense of an opportunity in front of us for further engagement. that was something that we were hoping to do with community leaders, is take them on this delegation, so they are conscious of the kind of environment around them. Unfortunately, that has been halted. In June, inshallah, one of the things that CAIR California does is the Muslim Day at the Capitol. It's the nation's largest Muslim civic engagement program. The idea is, again, to take between 600 to 800 Muslims from around the state of California to advocate on behalf of their community. We have a legislative agenda. Community members, get to break up into different groups, knock on the doors of every congressperson and senator, and advocate on behalf of their community. That program is still active, inshallah, and we are hoping that community leaders join us on that trip. There will be buses from around the Bay Area that essentially take you to Sacramento and then essentially drop you off at the end of the day. I think that's all I have to share in regards to that. But I think currently the sort of digital engagement is something that communities around the Bay Area are testing out. And so whether it be for census work, whether it be for spiritual sort of healing in these times, I think that it will be imperative that our masajid and our community organizations really shift its strategy a little bit and focus on ways to bring the information that is necessary for the community digitally. And so as Brother Muhi and Sister Lisa had articulated, the information should be in the newsletters, should be shared on social media platforms. If folks are struggling with their social media at the moment, I know that many of us are more than happy to support with that sort of process. At least I can volunteer myself for that. But it's essentially that we're communicating with one another is what we're hoping to see from a lot of the masajid. So if you need help with any of this work, please reach out.
Jazakallah khair, Osama. Thank you. So any further questions or ideas about how we might work together to make sure that masajid are supported in this process? Anything that comes to mind, go ahead and feel free to share. I think just, again, please stay in touch with us as much as you can. Continue to wait for updates from us on how we are continuing to troubleshoot our outreach and community engagement. It really is the core of our work. We want to make sure that the community feels seen and supported. And so we just really can't thank you all enough for your ongoing partnership to make sure that we are all reaching the community as effectively and impactfully as possible. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Take care, inshallah.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Mahid.
Thank you.